Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to explore a psychological phenomenon that is frequently misunderstood as coldness, indifference, or even depression, but is often something entirely different. We are discussing the people who simply vanish, those who can go days, sometimes weeks, without speaking to a single soul, engaging in social media, or answering a text message, and yet they feel absolutely no distress during this isolation. In fact, for these individuals, this disappearance is not a crisis. It is a baseline requirement for their existence. We often label this behavior as ghosting or flakiness, but medically and psychologically, we are looking at a specific form of nervous system regulation known as social hibernation. Today, we will unpack the biology behind this need for silence and why the absence of interaction generates peace rather than loneliness.
Thank you, Jane. It is vital that we reframe how we view this withdrawal. When a client tells me they spent the entire weekend staring at a ceiling or sitting in a dark room without speaking, my first question is not, were you sad, but rather, did you feel relieved? For a specific subset of the population, those with schizoid personality traits, high sensory processing sensitivity, or deep introversion, the social world is not a source of energy. It is a source of frantic, depleting vibration. To vanish is not an act of aggression toward others. It is an act of preservation for the self. When they retreat, they are not pushing people away. They are simply turning off the noise so they can hear their own heartbeat again. They are returning to a homeostatic baseline that requires absolute zero social friction.
That concept of social friction is fascinating from a neurological standpoint. We know that every social interaction, even a pleasant one, requires complex cognitive processing. We have to read microexpressions, modulate our tone, filter our thoughts, and predict the other person's reactions. For the neurotypical brain, this is automatic and often rewarding due to dopamine and oxytocin release. However, for the individuals we are discussing today, this processing loop feels like a computer running too many high-power applications at once. Eventually, the battery drains and the fan spins out of control. The vanishing act is essentially a hard reboot. During this offline period, their cortisol levels drop significantly, and their brain enters a state of rest that sleep alone cannot provide. It is a waking dormancy where the social processing centers finally go dark.
Precisely, Jane. And this brings us to the most controversial aspect of this behavior, the lack of guilt. Family members and partners often feel hurt because they assume that if you love someone, you should miss them when you are apart. They project their own anxiety onto the silence. However, the person who vanishes usually feels a profound sense of neutrality. They do not sit in their room worrying about the people they aren't talking to. This isn't because they lack empathy or care. It is because their internal experience of time and object permanence is different. When they are in hibernation mode, the external world ceases to exist emotionally. They are suspended in a vacuum of the now. To feel guilt requires stepping outside of oneself to imagine another's feelings, but the very purpose of the isolation is to stop stepping outside of oneself.
Let's dig deeper into that concept of emotional object permanence. In child development, object permanence is understanding that a toy still exists even when hidden under a blanket. In adult psychology, there is an emotional equivalent, the ability to feel the connection to a partner even when they are not present. For those who are prone to social hibernation, this link can temporarily sever during their recharge periods. It's not that they forget they have loved ones, it's that the emotional tether becomes dormant. They enter a state of extreme autonomy where they feel entirely complete as a singular unit. This can be terrifying for a partner who has an anxious attachment style, but for the vanisher, it feels like a return to their factory settings. They are not lonely because they are fully occupied by their own internal landscape.
I often explain this to couples by using the analogy of a deep-sea diver. When these individuals go down into the depths of their own minds to decompress, the radio signal to the surface gets cut off. They aren't ignoring the surface boat out of malice, they simply cannot hear the signal from that depth. The pressure of the water, their internal world, is all-consuming. What is crucial to understand is that during these days of silence, they are often doing absolutely nothing productive by societal standards. They might play a repetitive video game, read the same book, or just sit. This nothingness is the medicine. If they were to answer a text message, it would require surfacing too quickly, which results in a psychological form of the bends: irritability, disorientation, and exhaustion.
This aligns perfectly with what we see in studies regarding autistic burnout and the fatigue associated with high-functioning anxiety, though this behavior isn't exclusive to those diagnoses. The common thread is a nervous system that has a lower threshold for stimulation and a higher requirement for integration. In a hyper-connected world, we are expected to be on call 24/7. For the personality type we are profiling, the smartphone is an intrusion device. The notification sound triggers a fight-or-flight response. Therefore, the vanishing is often preceded by a feeling of being hunted or smothered. By disappearing, they are reclaiming agency. It is the only way they know how to say, "I own my time and I own my mind," without having to have a confrontation, which would drain them even further.
That reclaiming of agency is key, Jane. We must differentiate this from depression. A depressed person isolates and often spirals into self-loathing, ruminating on their failures. They want to connect but feel they can't. The social hibernator, conversely, isolates and feels a wave of euphoria or contentment. They finally feel like themselves. There is no rumination, there is only relief. They are not hiding from life, they are recovering from the performance of living. We live in a culture that rewards extroversion and constant availability. Because of this, these individuals spend their public hours wearing a heavy mask. They smile, they nod, they participate. This masking consumes massive amounts of glucose and cognitive energy. The vanishing is simply the time required to take the heavy mask off and massage the bruised face underneath.
So let's talk about the specific demographics here. While this can happen to anyone, it is most prevalent in those with schizoid personality adaptations. Note I say adaptations, not necessarily the disorder itself, and the highly intelligent. There is a correlation between high intellect and the need for solitude to process complex information. When these individuals vanish, their brains are often sorting through the data of the previous weeks. It is a defragmentation process. If you interrupt a computer while it is defragmenting, it crashes. Similarly, if you force these people to socialize during their reset window, they may lash out or withdraw even further. The duration of the vanishing usually correlates to the intensity of the social exposure that preceded it. A heavy wedding weekend might require 3 days of silence.
And this leads us to the conflict of time blindness, which you touched on earlier. For the person in hibernation, 3 days feels like 3 hours. They lose track of the calendar because they are operating on internal biological time, not social time. They emerge from their cave feeling refreshed, thinking, "I just took a little break," while their friends are frantic, thinking they have been abandoned. This discrepancy in time perception is the root of so much relational conflict. The vanisher assumes the bond is intact because their feelings haven't changed. They simply paused the movie. They are shocked to return and find the audience, their friends and family, angry that the screen went blank. They struggle to understand why the relationship requires constant maintenance to be considered valid.
It is interesting to note the physiological state of the body during these periods. Heart rate variability often improves, blood pressure normalizes, and cortisol levels bottom out. They are essentially in a self-induced meditative state, even if they are just binge-watching a series or staring out a window. What society calls lazy or aloof is actually a highly efficient biological regulation strategy. If they denied themselves this time, we would likely see somatic symptoms arise: migraines, digestive issues, chronic fatigue, or autoimmune flare-ups. The body forces the shutdown if the mind doesn't choose it. So in many ways, this vanishing act is a health intervention. It is their body saying, we are closing the shop until the inventory is restocked.
Yes, and acceptance of this biological reality is the first step toward health for these individuals. The guilt I mentioned earlier usually only arrives after the fact, when they re-enter society and are scolded for their absence. Left to their own devices, they feel fine. The pathology is not in the solitude. It is in the mismatch between their needs and societal expectations. I encourage my clients to stop apologizing for their disappearances and start scheduling them. If you know you have a high-demand event coming up, book your Vanish days immediately after. Communicate this to your loved ones. Say, I am going into the bunker for 48 hours to recharge. I am not mad, I am just offline. This shifts the narrative from abandonment to managed self-care.
Communication is indeed the bridge here, but we must address the difficulty these individuals have in articulating their needs before they hit the wall. Often, the urge to vanish hits suddenly. It is like a breaker tripping. 1 minute they are fine. The next, the very sound of a human voice is physically painful. This is social saturation. At this point, the language centers of the brain are often the first to go offline. They literally cannot find the words to explain why they can't speak. This is why they ghost. Sending a text explaining, I can't talk, is ironically a form of talking. It requires output. A true hibernation requires zero output. This creates a catch-22, where the action needed to reassure others is the exact action they are incapable of performing.
That is a profound point, Jane. The inability to output is the defining feature. This is why partners need to develop a system that doesn't rely on verbal reassurance. Maybe it is an emoji code. A single moon emoji means, I'm going dark, I am safe, see you on the other side. This reduces the barrier to entry. We also need to destigmatize the lack of missing someone. I tell partners, they don't miss you because you are internalized within them. You are safe inside their fortress. They only need to check on things that are outside the walls. If you are inside their heart, they don't need to call you to know you are there. It is a paradoxical form of intimacy. They feel safe enough with you to ignore you. Trusting the bond will survive the silence.
That perspective on intimacy, safety allowing for silence, is revolutionary for many. It challenges the anxious attachment model that equates constant contact with love. However, we must also look at the risks. When does this behavior cross the line from healthy regulation to maladaptive avoidance? If the vanishing periods are becoming longer and the reentry becomes harder, that is a warning sign. If the person begins to dread the return to reality so much that they sabotage their job or relationships to stay in the void, that is when we move from reset to retreat. The goal of the hibernation is to gather the strength to return to the world, not to dismantle the world so you never have to deal with it.
Agreed. The metric is function. Does the hibernation facilitate life or does it replace life? For the healthy vanisher, they come back better. They are more patient, more creative, and more affectionate after their break. They have filled the well. If they come back more resentful, more detached, or more anxious, then the hibernation is not working. It is likely an avoidance of a deeper trauma or a symptom of severe depression. That for the majority of people fitting this profile, the isolation is a superpower. It allows them to think thoughts that are impossible to think in a crowd. It allows them to detach from groupthink and form original opinions. It creates a self-sufficiency that is incredibly rare in our codependent society.
Let's touch on the sensory aspect one last time. During these vanished days, many report a heightened sensitivity to their environment. They might listen to music and feel it more deeply, or enjoy the texture of a blanket with intense appreciation. It is as if by turning down the volume on people, they turn up the volume on existence. This suggests that their baseline state isn't numbness, it's actually hypersensitivity. They feel too much, not too little.
The vanishing is a way to throttle the input so they can actually process the beauty of the world without being overwhelmed by the complexity of human dynamics. They are seeking a pure sensory experience, unpolluted by social expectations.
Beautifully put. They are seeking pure existence, and this is why they feel no guilt. In that state of pure existence, moral obligations, which are social constructs, fade away. A tree does not feel guilty for not speaking to the forest. It just grows. These individuals tap into that vegetative, rhythmic state of being. It is a very primal, ancient mode of nervous system function. If you are someone who loves a person like this, the best gift you can give them is the gift of guilt-free absence. Let them go. Trust them to come back. Do not stand at the door knocking. It only adds more noise. Leave a plate of food, send a love note, and go live your life. They will return when the storm in their head clears.
And if you are the person who vanishes, if you are listening to this and recognizing yourself, know that you are not broken. You do not have a defect in your empathy chip. You simply have a high-performance engine that requires a specific cooling cycle. The world may call you distant, but your biology calls you efficient. Your ability to be alone without being lonely is a tremendous asset. It protects you from codependency and allows for deep introspection. The key is to manage the bridge between your two worlds. Build a drawbridge, not a wall. Let people know when the bridge is going up, and trust that they will be there when you lower it again.
To close, we must normalize the need for disappearance. We treat social battery drainage as a character flaw rather than a physiological limit. But just as we do not judge a bear for hibernating or the tide for receding, we should not judge the human need to withdraw. If you vanish for days and feel nothing at all, you are likely feeling peace, and in a chaotic world, peace is a rare and precious commodity. Protect it, but also protect the people you love by helping them understand it. You are not leaving them, you are returning to yourself, and that is the most essential journey any of us can take. Thank you for joining us in this quiet space today.